Oh, hi. Didn't see you there. How are you doing? Are you ready for your minutes with Marcus? I sure hope so. Today we're going to be talking about locking out the deadlift without overextending your lower back and proper butt positioning in the deadlift. Are you ready? I think you are. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's first get some weights on this bar, just so we can feel it. There's one. Okay. Let's get our bar on the ground. All right. I'm going to show two forms of not locking out the deadlift. Number one, I'm going to lock out my knees and not my hips. That looks like this. Number two, I'm going to lock out my hips and not my knees. Typically this happens if I'm only thinking about pushing my pelvis forward. Which is funny, because if I told anyone to stand up straight who's sort of slouched, who's going to do this? And then walk around as if they're standing up straight. Hopefully nobody. So that looks like this. All right. So those are two errors in locking out a deadlift. Lastly, I'm going to show what it looks like to attempt to overlock out a deadlift and overextend in my lower back. This is a no-no. Sorry for the pant pulled up, but these are a little tight. Okay, so that would have passed a competition lift. However, especially for the majority of training, that's not safe. We want to avoid an overextension in the lower back. But just so it's clear, same thing, especially with hip thrusts and glute bridges, we should think about, so if I'm in a bent position or kettlebell swings, we should think about someone simply pulling a string straight up. Instead of thinking about hips forward, head back, this is not standing tall, and this is an overextension in the lower back. If I just stand straight up, that just looks like this. And we can still be safe, right? So that's going to look like this. A little slower, lock it out, instead of going like this. Okay? So we don't want to finish. This is what it looks like for neither hips or knees to be locked out. This is hips and not knees. Knees and not hips. Both. Okay, we can safely do this without an arch in the lower back. Okay. Lastly, there's a tendency for your butt to be too high in the deadlift. When the butt is too high, technically it's a different movement called the Romanian deadlift or stiff-legged deadlift, which is a great exercise on its own. What that's going to do is work primarily your hamstrings and lower back. Again, perfectly fine. There's no such thing really as a bad movement. That's not the point of talking about this. The point is, can you get a bigger lift, or can you be stronger in the movement with a different form? And the answer is yes. So this is what your deadlift looked like. I would say your depth looked right about here. Could be wrong. This is why I need a video, because I even need a video of my movement. I don't know what I look like, but I would say you looked right about here. Back parallel with the ground probably looks like this. You were right about here. Now, one reason you might be doing that is you recall me saying that with any lift, or maybe you recall this, with any lift, you're going to be at an advantage from a physics standpoint if the weight is closest to your center of mass. So technically in a deadlift, because our knees are in the way, you will be at an advantage if your shins are vertical. However, that's only true to an extent, because if my shins are completely vertical, that means my butt has to be up. If my butt is up, I'm going to use less of my quadriceps. So really what I've said in the past is you want your shins to be as vertical as possible, and you want your butt to be as low as possible. The best position is some kind of combination of those two, which is going to look slightly different for everyone. So while knees forward pushes a bar forward, and this might technically make the weight a little bit heavier because it's further away from our center of mass, again, there's a compromise, because by the knees going further forward, I'm using more of my quadriceps, so I'm stronger in the lift, okay? So watch me here, getting set up. This is butt too high. I might set up like this, but before my lift, I'm going here. I'm lifting right here, back angle right about there. Again, depending on the person and the torso and femur length, that position can change like this. But rarely is the strongest deadlift with the back position like this, or even worse like this. Again, the higher the butt, the less quadriceps you're going to use. So you might not have saw my knees because of the weights, but I started here when I actually did my lift. My knees are a little bit forward. Again, certainly that's at a slight disadvantage because I've now moved the weight further from my center of mass. However, that's acceptable because I know knees a little bit forward, I'm going to be utilizing more quadricep. I'm going to be able to get more of that push through the legs. So watch the difference. First is butt too high, Romanian type of deadlift. Secondly, I'm going to get my legs more into it, drop the butt. Drop the butt. Butt too high. Butt too high. Drop the butt. So watch your own video again. I would say your butt was a little bit too high and still very strong. If anything, it just shows how strong your hamstrings and lower back are. However, I want you to change that technique a little bit because I know you can have a bigger deadlift if you utilize a little more of that quad strength, which means the knees have to be a little more forward. Okay, you can see how terrible my cardio is. So I'm breathing so heavy. Here's the bands. These are nice because they're not going to pull on the hair, so it's going to be good for Dan because they're, first of all, it's a fabric, it's not a rubber material, and they're a lot thicker, or a lot wider, I should say. Now the only thing that's interesting is the stronger the band is, as you can see here, the red is the easiest, the longer it is. So if you use this hardest band, as you can see here, my tension starts right here. So that means if I do a side step, I'm gonna feel a release of tension right about here. Whereas obviously if the band is shorter, you could probably start here, but right here the band's basically falling off. So that means really you can't go much closer than this, so you have to start here and go out and then come back, which is fine. It's just something to be aware, especially for our supine stuff. Again, you're gonna have to start right about here. But when I do this, I can't get much more than 10 to 15 in a row. Oh, it starts burning. Woo! All right, hope that was helpful. You got to stand up your deadlifts, especially for competition. You want your deadlifts to count, obviously. That's the same with bench press. For competition, they need to be able to see that bar touches the chest. As a standard rule, I sent you the rules on this. I was hoping you would read those at some point. As a standard rule, you want to pause for at least half a second, which looks like this. Pause, boom. So it's like the least of a pause. It might look like I'm not pausing, but I am. This is a pause, as opposed to, because also what they're looking for is you're not bouncing the weight off your chest, which you can do. A long pause would look like this. I'm not saying you have to pause for 3 seconds, literally half a pause. Anything where it's clear the bar has slowed down and it's not bouncing. That's gonna be required for the bench press. Okay, this is mainly a video about the deadlift. Main points: stand up your lift. Standing tall is not the same thing as a back arch. And hopefully you know what that feels like, especially with the glute bridges and hip thrusts. Because that's particularly where it's important, because you can always get higher on hip thrust if you basically do a back bend. And then lastly, you need to figure out getting that butt a little lower right before you lift the weights, so you can feel more like the deadlift is a leg push with the back being strong. It's really a leg push for the first half of the movement. The last half is a glute extension. As the bar passes the knees, you're simply basically doing just like the movement of a glute extension or hip thrust. And that's it. Hope it was helpful.